Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.
This is Sasha Christie, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, the UK's biggest paranormal network. And this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Hello, thank you for that intro, Satya. It's lovely. Right, now we've got I'm going to do a Rendlesham special tonight with probably the best researcher on the Rendlesham case that there is. He's been on it for 30 odd years. But just before that, I'm going to give my normal call-outs. And because it's a Rendlesham special, these are going to be people that are often seen in Rendlesham Forest walking around with Brenda Butler. Now, there's a call-out to Gawdy Googer, Ipswich, Suffolk, Bernard Hunt, St Neots, Cambridgeshire, UK, and John Hanson, Alvechurch, Worcestershire. And obviously, Brenda Butler, you were given a call out on the last show, so I hope you're going to be listening too. Right, now, the gentleman I've got on today, his name is Ronnie Dugdale, and I class him as probably the top researcher of the Rendlesham Forest, and I don't think anyone knows more about it than he does. Certainly much more than me, and he's actually put me on the right path a couple of times with certain aspects of it. So I'm going to waste no more time now. I'm going to introduce Ronnie Dugdale. Welcome, Ronnie.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for inviting me on your show.
No, so I'm really pleased. I mean, we were going to do this a couple of weeks ago, but there's been sort of one or two things got in the way, but hope everything's all right now.
Yeah, everything's great.
Good. Now, I'm not sort of underrating you. You've been investigating it or researching this for over 30 years now, haven't you, the Rendlesham case?
Well, I haven't been researching for 30 years. I've known about it for 30 years. I mean, like a lot of people apart from Brenda Butler, of course, and not so much so, but Dot Street and Jenny Randolph, they were the first ladies to investigate it. I mean, I heard about this case back in the day. I knew some people who were involved, lost interest. Well, nothing was ever said about it for years. And then I really got more involved towards the 30th anniversary when I looked into everything. So I've kept in contact with people over the years. I've read just about everything there is to read on it and watched documentaries and stuff like that. And with the thoughts in the back of my mind that I knew people who were there and what they said at the time, I've always been intrigued by it. So, I wouldn't say I'm the best investigator on the Rendlesham case. I would give that trophy to Brenda Butler any day.
Yeah, well, I mean, she obviously was the pioneer in it, and I imagine this is where you got your start in it anyway from Brenda. I think you've kind of taken up the mantle from where Brenda left off. So I know she still looks into it and everything, but yeah. I think you went into I don't know, how can I describe it? I think you went into a more clinical aspect of it, didn't you? You went into deeper aspects of it. I think not speaking to everyone you can, and I know Brenda and Dot did all that in the early days.
Yeah, but, the one thing that's really set me on the right path was Brenda turned over her archive to me, and I was allowed to look at anything and everything, and I did. you know, and we spent a lot of time together, and she was very kind to me. And had it not been for her, I wouldn't have got the contacts I had today, and I probably wouldn't know half of what I know. And of course, a lot of the stuff that's in Brenda's archives is still unheard of, apart from people who've looked through her archives.
Yeah,
There's lots of stuff in there what probably didn't seem as if that was relevant until I found stuff out, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, Brenda said this and done this, and it all tied in. You know, so all the information she's got there, not so much who she spoke to back in the day, because it was a very, very difficult job that she done, but some of the people she spoke to and hints she was given, from Colonel Holt right down to, you know, the fisherman in the pub, she got an awful lot of information there that hasn't all been surfaced just yet, but it's all very relevant.
I think we also explain who we're talking about. Brenda. We're talking about Brenda Butler. She wrote a book called Sky Crash with Dot Street and Jenny Randalls. But I think Brenda's notes were the crux of the whole book anyway, weren't they, Ronnie, as far as I understand it?
Oh, for definite, yeah. Or her research anyway. There were her contacts. Of course, that was the person they call Steve Roberts, his real name J.D. England. That's no secret anymore. He was the person who first come to her and told her about their situation. And had it not been for that investigation, who knows? Maybe nothing would ever surfaced about this, but...
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if it wasn't for Brenda, I think none of us would ever heard about this. Whether the memorandum would have ever come out, I don't know, because I think that probably came out because of all the fuss that was being made about the case, I think, in the early days, you know, when it started to surface.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the memorandum, I mean, the Sky Crash was due to come out. Certain things surfaced at that time, and, you know, if you look at it with a suspicious mind, maybe things were put in place for a reason.
Yeah.
She's certainly done more work than she's ever got credit for.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah,
and Dot as well. Dot was included. But,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, they wrote some early articles, didn't they? Did one go into the Omni magazine?
Well, Brenda didn't have no part in that, and Dot spoke to Mishera, his name was the chap, but the person who gave the interview, his name was Colonel Conrad, who was the base commander. And of course, when we hear these things about other people being the whistleblower, hang on, Colonel Conrad was the first person to speak to her.
Oh yeah,
you know. So he spoke to him. Brenda was actually told by Jenny, and this isn't that well known, not to speak to Mishera. So she was a little bit upset and surprised when she found that Dot and Jenny had spoken to him. But that's another day, another story. Lots of that in the Rendlesham story. You know, people going behind each other's back. There was a lot of it going on. There was other investigators involved. We didn't need to go into that, Dave. Let's stick to the facts of the investigation,
Well, right, I think right from there then, Ronnie, I think I'll give the stage to you, and you can give us the story in your own words, however you want to tell it, and I'll sit back and shut up.
Oh, I don't want you to shut up, David. And there's going to be questions you need to butt in and ask me. But I think there are people out there, especially in the States, who don't know anything about that, and also young people in the UK don't know anything about the Rendlesham Forest incident. So I think before we start anything, we need to just explain a little bit about where it was and what happened over them days. So this was a series of incidents that took place over the Christmas period in 1980. And the bases were called RAF Woodbridge and RAF Bentwaters. Now, they're two geographically different locations, but so close together that they were known as the twin bases. About 70 miles or so northeast of London. Anyone who knows that area, the whole of the east coast of England for decades was used for military weapons research, radar research, all sorts of strange tales from the Second World War about villages being evacuated at Shingle Street, secret experiments, death rays, burned bodies, a lot of the stuff I found out in Brenda's notes. She probably didn't think that was that important at the time. Fishermen being paid to keep out of the waters and prisoners being put on evacuation alert. strange plasma orbs and beams of light regularly seen by mariners off the Suffolk coast, well, and Norfolk as well, where my hometown of Galston-on-Sea. We observed these orbs. We didn't know what they were, but there was something going on there. Some people seem to think they were attracted by the nuclear power station down there at Sizewell. So RAF Bentworth and Woodbridge, they served as British installations until 1951, and then released them to the United States. At one time, back in 1980, there was 4,000 personnel employed on them bases. You can imagine that's a little bit of Little America going on just there. It was rumoured that they housed tactical nuclear weapons. I don't know what else the airmen would be doing there protecting if it weren't nuclear weapons, but of course you speak to any of the people involved, they have to deny it, you know. So if you speak even to this day to, your good friend Charles Holt, he wouldn't answer questions on stuff like that.
No. Well, they had weapons storage areas, but what was kept in those storage areas, who knows?
Well, there was weapons storage areas in Bentwaters, there was weapons storage areas in Woodbridge as well. But I think they give little clues. There's a map from that time, and that says non-nuclear weapons storage area.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah.
So what's the other one, you know?
Yeah, just to muddy the waters a bit, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that was the area where it was taking place. The runway at RAF Woodbridge is a massive, massive runway, and that was built by the Brits for the sole purpose of our planes coming back in difficulty. That was like a crash site. They could land there and crash, and they could get dragged off to the side, and there'd be no problem. That's a massive runway. Very suitable for experimental craft, things like that. You know, if you've got the Americans have got an experimental craft and they needed a big runway, perfect for them. So you can understand why they wanted to be at Woodbridge and at Bentwaters. So anyway, the first thing that we knew about for these incidents was on the 25th to the 26th, so it's Christmas evening really, going into Boxing Day. And sometime after midnight, we don't need to go into exactly when, because as people who've followed this case will know, none of the accounts sort of, they're not the same.
Yeah,
so Jim
it goes within about 3 hours, doesn't it? I think about 3 hours difference in the sort of
Jim Penniston said it was after midnight, although on the statement say 3 a.m. John has always said that's 3 a.m. Now, the people that I've got to know over the years and I spoke to who were on flight that night told me they thought that was nearer 2 o'clock because of what they'd had to done up until that time, and hearing the radio transmissions that they picked up when they first found something was going on. They thought that couldn't have been 12 o'clock, couldn't have been 3 o'clock. Time doesn't really matter what happened. So we're Christmas Day into Boxing Day. So we're going into the 26th of December, and because it was Christmas, like everywhere, David, you work on skeleton staffs, don't you? I think that wherever you work, the employers try and give the married people time off. They'll bring in the unmarried people from other flights. So there was a mishmash of personnel on there. But basically, Sea Flight had just started their third midnight shift. So there's a staff sergeant, Bud Steffens, and he's fairly new to the base. He was a new recruit, although he was the supervisor that night. He was a law enforcement supervisor, I beg your pardon. John Burrows, he'd been there for 17 months, 19-year-old. Bud Steffens gets in contact with John. It's a quiet night, John. How about you come and ride round with me, get to know each other better? There may have been another reason you want to do that. We don't need to go into that. So everything's laid back. Everything is, not the normal routine. People are enjoying themselves. Christmas songs were being played over the radio net, and guys were goofing around. It's Christmas. And the airbase was quiet, and there shouldn't have been any aircraft flying that night. So one of the checks that Bud Steffens and John had to do was to ensure that the east gate, which was commonly known as the back gate back then of Woodbridge base, was securely locked. Now, this was a gate that was a shortcut in between the two bases. There wasn't much of a gate. I think it was just a bar in them days. That was usually manned up until 6 o'clock, and then that was left. but they had a combination lock on it. Several people knew it. Electricians would use it, fitters would use it, and sometimes they'd leave it unsecured, so they'd go down there and check that that's secured. So as they drove down to the east gate, Bud Stephens noticed some strange lights in the forest. This is up ahead. The lights appeared to be hovering about treetop level. That's very different in them days back then. There weren't so many trees. There was an exclusion zone around where that roadway was because of security, so they could see all around, people on the gate. But they could see at the bottom of the road there was something going off in the trees, some lights, some red, white, blue lights. First that looked to them like that was a Christmas light display. And that seemed to be originating from the edge of where the Rendlesham Forest tree started at the bottom of the road. I know you know where it is, David. You've been down there hundreds of times, but...
Well, I don't know hundreds, but I've been there quite a few times.
Well, you've been there a few times. But if we can explain to the listener that road goes down, I suppose, several hundred yards, maybe a quarter of a mile, something like that. And then you come to another road, which is the main road where cars would drive down. So they see these lights going down there, and Bud Stephens is wondering what it is. And so he says to John, "What's that? Have you ever seen lights like that in the forest?" Well, John had that job of checking that gate loads and loads and loads of times. So he's looking and he's, no. I haven't seen anything like that before. We need to go and investigate. And so they opened the gate and they drove down there.
So at this point, there's no, sorry, I'm interrupted. At this point, they're looking at a completely different direction as to where the Orford Lighthouse is, aren't they?
Not really. Well, they are
to a different angle to what I understand.
Yeah, a different angle. Yeah, but you got to remember, David, the Orford Lighthouse is 6.3 miles away.
Yeah, exactly. That's what
so this would look like a pinprick, and this is one big white orb of light and other coloured lights that seem to be manoeuvring around it. This is just a few hundred yards away. You couldn't confuse what they looked at with the Orford Nest.
Yeah, I'm just trying to kill off that little story, early on. Anyway, carry on. Sorry, Ronnie, go on, carry on.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And so they drove down to the junction where the East Gate Road meets the main forest road, and they turned the truck round to face back to the East Gate, ready for a quick getaway. And at that moment, a large white spherical light moved towards them, and as if that was mirroring their movement. It seemed really close at this time. Neither of them liked what they were feeling. Burroughs and Stephens decided to get back to the East Gate. They thought they needed to call it in to the law enforcement desk. So at that time, there used to be lots of people listening to the radio communications. So if there was anything that was out of the way like that, they wouldn't use the radios. They would use the landline. They had a phone down there, which was a landline, and they would pick it up and they'd speak straight to the law enforcement desk. Well, that night, on the law enforcement desk was Sergeant Crash McCabe. So John Burroughs had a history of playing practical jokes on Sergeant McCabe. There was a lot of that. If you knew any of the boys back in the day, they were practical jokers, a lot of them.
I imagine they were. I mean, they were 19-year-olds, most of them, weren't they? So, I mean...
Well, they were, and they were out of their country for the first time. They were experiencing alcohol for the first time, and I used to work in a club in Great Yarmouth, and they used to come up there, and they let the hair down. Who could blame them? You know, they had a good time. So anyway, when John got on the phone to tell McCabe that there was something going on down there, McCabe thought that was just a Christmas wind-up, another practical joke, so he wouldn't take him seriously. So John gave the phone to Bud Stephens, and Bud confirmed everything that Burroughs had said was true. And he said, well, if you don't believe us, you better come down to the gate now, because the lights are still visible. So McCabe still thought that, but Burroughs was joking about. So he said he was going to put a call through to Sergeant Coffey at Central Security Control, knowing that if that was a joke, Burroughs wouldn't want that to happen, and then he's going to quickly say, no, you know, ha, ha, ha. But he didn't. And then Sergeant Coffey realised that there was something serious there that needed investigating. So Sergeant Coffey called Sergeant James Penniston, and he was the on-duty flight chief at RAF Woodbridge that night. And Penston says he was having a snack at the time, and that's why he can remember that was 12 o'clock. But anyway, Coffey told Penston to rendezvous with John Burroughs and Bud Stephens down at the Eastgate. And of course Penston wanted to know what the hell was going on, you know, why do I need to go down there? But Coffey wouldn't tell him. And he said, look, I'd rather not tell you. I'm not going to tell you any more information, but you need to get down there as quick as you can. And when you get down there, you'll be briefed by Burroughs and Stephens. So that night, Jim Penniston was being driven by Ed Cabansag. You might have heard quite a bit about him, David. Yeah. He's a main player in this, but he's someone who's kept himself very much to himself.
Yeah, sure.
Although he did speak to a couple of people. He spoke to Georgina Brony, and I believe he spoke to oh dear me, this is where you go blank. Anyway, he spoke to someone else on the TV show. But more or less he keeps himself quiet. So anyway, Ed Cabansag was a new recruit. That was his first night on shift. So there he is driving Jim Penniston down to the Eastgate, and all the while he's thinking, I know what this is. This is a Christmas prank. This is like a fraternity thing. They're going to get me there. They're going to throw me in a pond or in the mud and stuff like that. So he's a bit suspicious when he get there. So anyway, when they showed up at the gate, Bud Stephens went over to him and they started talking, and Penniston walked over to the gate and looked out to the forest, and he could see the lights. There they were, still there. And Penniston says to Stephens, did you see it crash? Because at this time, everyone involved is thinking that's a downed aircraft.
Yeah, you would.
Light aircraft or something. You would do, wouldn't you? Because what else would make that sort of light in the forest? So Stephens says, it didn't crash, I saw it land. So Penniston's still thinking that's a downed aircraft. He rings the Central Security Control from the Eastgate Guard Shack, and they told him they had no scheduled flying that evening. And so they started to do some checking, and they called RAPCOM, which would have been their radar at Bentwars, to find out if they had anything on radar. They called Eastern Radar, which was anyway, that was somewhere. And they also called Heathrow Tower. That's when your mind goes blank, Dave. You have to remember.
I'll glue those bits in later.
Oh yeah, RAF Watton. RAF Watton. Eastern Radar was based at RAF Watton. I'm not the only person to get that wrong, because I've heard Colonel Holt.
That's right. Yeah, I know. He's got. These things, I mean, there's a lot to remember, and you get crucified if you make a mistake, but hell, I don't care. Yeah. So they also contacted London Heathrow, and both of them said that they had tracked a bogey, but they'd lost contact with it when it dropped off their radar screens somewhere in the vicinity of RF Bentwars, or the Rendlesham Forest anyway. So with that in mind, Sergeant Chandler contacted the Shift Commander's office, and within a minute or so, Penniston had got to go ahead to proceed off base to conduct an investigation. So Jim is still thinking, it's a downed aircraft. You know, what else could it be? Now, Bud Stephens had all sorts of rumours, and you'll hear this from a lot of the airmen who were stationed there. They were told stories about witchcraft, about a lady who rid a bike with no face, and that witchcraft started in Butley, and that there was monks in the forest, and there was all sorts of things. And he'd heard about these lights in the forest before, because although this is the main incident, the Rendlesham incident of what we know of Christmas 1980, things have been going on there for years. I mean, if you speak to some of the airmen who were there in the 70s and 60s, they'll all tell you tales about strange lights. And they were told, more or less, ignore them, don't talk about them, don't make trouble for yourself. If you see lights in the sky, you know, if you report them in, you only make trouble for yourself. And I think if anyone was to report a UFO, that's not career enhancing, is it? No, sure. No.
So Bud Stephens said, I ain't going. He was scared. He said, I'm not going. He said, I'll stay here. I'm not going in the Queen's Forest. I'm going to stay on the base. And so he had a choice then. He had to take Ed Cabansag and John Burroughs, who was law enforcement. The USF had they called it the Status Forces Agreement with the British government, and supposedly they weren't supposed to take any arms off base. I don't think it's strictly true. I think they had some sort of permission where they could go between bases with them. But in the main part, if they went off base, they left their weapons with an armour or a gate or with someone responsible and things like that. But it may be true, it may not be true. I've heard rumours that John Burroughs held on to his 38 sidearm. So anyway, all of a sudden, all the Christmas music that's playing over the radio went silent. Donnie Dillard, who was at Central Security Control, had been being the DJ for the night. He comes over the radio and he says, no unnecessary radio communications. Everything has to cease. He tells that everyone that there's a serious situation being investigated over the Woodbridge base. And the airmen on duty at both Woodbridge and Bentley's End, because they're all ears done, whatever could be going on. So Sergeant Penniston, John Burroughs, Edgar Bansack drive down the East Gate. They took a right turn into the main Forest Service Road as far as we know. No one's really certain where they went, and as you know, David, every track on that forest looks the same.
Oh yeah.
You know, so you know, when people say they were certain where they went, I'm still not absolutely certain. Yeah. And I don't think that really matter anyway.
I've got to say, I've walked around on my own, and even though you've got signposts everywhere, I've still got lost. You know. Yeah,
and me too, David. You know, one track looks very much like the other, don't they? Yeah. And you've got the benefit of a UFO trail there and everything now. So anyway, they headed towards where they see the lights in the dense forest. You know what's like down there, pitch black down there. And it appeared as a white light with a tinge of orange to it. But from the moment they entered the forest, the radio started acting up. Now, they had a repeater at Woodbridge Base to kick the signal to Bentwaters, and under normal circumstances that worked really well. There was no need. There was some, I'm told, there was some areas of the forest that weren't so good for reception, but they knew where they were. But the closer they got to the lights, the more interference the radio suffered. At that time, animals in the forest, they were running around in a frenzy and making a lot of noise, and people I've spoke to who were listening into the radio, they were hearing all this going on. So meanwhile, back at the base, there's lots of people standing on hills. So there was a place called Bunker Hill, and they're all looking to see what they could see. One of them people, his name is Bertolino, he can remember seeing a white glow in the forest, but it wasn't just like a white light. That seemed to have like a dome character to it. That was like, you know, that went so high and that stopped. So this was a really weird light, what was going on. But of course, when they said no more communications, there was nothing more for them to listen to, so they stopped looking. So they're going through the forest, and on a couple of occasions, they seemed to be getting closer to whatever it was what was lighting up the forest. That seemed to be moving away, and it appeared at one point to be toying with them. You know, they'd get close to it and then it'd be gone.
Yeah, like playing hide and seek type of thing.
Yeah, like it was playing with them. So anyway, they're moving through the woods at a pretty good pace. They were spread out in line, I'm told, by Burroughs and Cabansack. Penniston was leading the way, 15, 20 metres behind was Burroughs, and then Cabansack. Because Jim Penniston has said that he left Cabansack back at the Jeep as a communications relay, but Cabansack says he can't never remember not being with them. But they do have memory problems, so at least we know at one point he was definitely with the men at one point anyway. So the closer they got to the lights, the least it seemed like a crashed aircraft. And because Jim had been to lots of crashed aircraft, I think, and when he come to the conference in the 30th anniversary one, I think he said he'd been to 14 or more crashed aircraft. Not a nice job for anyone, because you get the smell of the fuel, you get the debris strewn all over the forest, you know, you get small fires everywhere. But this was nothing like that, because all the lights seemed to be in one area, too concentrated to be a crash. So that was clear early on that something weren't quite right. at that time also they said that the air was filled with a weird static electricity. The hair on their necks was standing up. The static charge was so strong that they could feel the hair pushing the berries even off the head. Everything seemed to be at a slower pace, and they've described like walking was difficult. It seemed almost like they were wading through water. So there's something going off there that definitely wasn't a crashed aircraft. So soon they come upon a clearing where the lights were emanating from. The lights were so intense that a large area of the forest was illuminated. I mean, that could have been what Bertolini was seeing from Bunker Hill, that same brilliant, bright, white light. They explain that when they got close to the lights, the atmosphere seemed to change. There was no sound, no rustling of the trees, no wind, no animal sounds now, and even the sky seemed different. So all of a sudden, the light intensified, it got really bright. The forest lit up like it was daytime, and there was a silent explosion of light. So the men dived to the ground. As reported, that Penniston yelled to John to open fire on it. How true that is, I don't know. Maybe when Jim comes on his show, he can verify that one.
Yeah, put that question to him, yeah.
Yeah. I think I asked John if he had his sidearm, and I didn't think he could even remember. So, and this is where it all gets.
So they certainly weren't carrying M16s or anything like that, though.
No, any arms they would have had, the big arms would have been left with the armour. And that was probably what Chandler was there for, was to take the arms before they went off base.
Yeah.
But hell, listen, David, if I'm going into a strange forest in a strange country and don't know what I'm dealing with, and you got to remember, this was at the time when the IRA were very active, you know.
And the height of the Cold War, of course.
And of course, the part of the Cold War, you'd want to have, 18-year-old, as big as John is, and you've seen him, he's a giant.
About 6'6", then he wasn't.
If I could put a 38 in my pocket, I'd put it in there. So anyway, this is where it gets interesting, because all three of the witnesses remember what they saw as different. So this is how John Burroughs remembers their encounter. So after seeing the white light silently explode and they hit the ground, all he remembers is seeing a red, oval, sun-like object in the clearing. Now, we're talking about a clearing in the woods. We're not talking about a big field, a farmer's field, or anything like that. We're talking about a small clearing in the woods. I know exactly where it is. So this oval, sun-like object lifted up through the trees and shot back towards the coast in a matter of seconds. That was just gone, like that. And so with the craft now gone, John Burroughs remembers that him and Penniston and perhaps Cabansack, for certain Cabansack ended up at the end point, so he must have been with them at that time. They ventured out towards the coast to see if they could see the UFO. They moved out of the forest, across the fence into the farmer's field, that some people call Capel Green, you know the field I'm talking about, Dave? Yeah, towards the coast. At one time they got really close and they thought it was going to land again, but it took off eastwards out towards the coast. Now, where they ended up was a mound that overlooks the estuary, and from there you can see the Orford Ness Lighthouse, you can see the Shipwash Lighthouse, you can see all around. Now, John remembers distinctively ending up there, and for years I thought that, well, that's not possible. I mean, they did describe getting wet at one time, but I'd looked at the maps and I'd seen like 8 different waterways blocking your way. But only last year, Brenda Butler and I, we went and done our own investigation, and we walked the walk, and we actually we didn't call on the farm. I was taking some photographs and the farmer came out, so I had to explain myself a bit to him.
Oh dear.
And I know. But anyway, we do these things, don't we? So I explained what I was doing, and he seemed really interested, and he said, I've been just watching the programme about that, and he was really interested, and he said, yes, you can get up onto, Brenda calls it Barrow Mound, but its actual real name is Barrow Hill. You can get up there without going through water, because these water courses that are mentioned on the maps, they're just drainage ditches, and especially in the winter they would have been empty anyway. And so he said, I wouldn't advise you to go down there, because one of the Greenall family lived down, I think the son, and I didn't really fancy getting shot at that time anyway. But but you could do it. And then, cause this chap says, by the way, I know you think I'm crazy, but something landed in my field last week. So anyway.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. You hear these stories all the while, but unless you call on the houses and speak to the people, I mean, he was so scared for his family that he loaded his shotgun out and went out there, and then it disappeared.
Wow.
But he described it as an intense big orb of light that landed in the field and was there for several minutes. Maybe it was a fireball. He didn't think it was. He knew it weren't a meteorite, but that was something.
Wow, that's nearly 40 years later, blimey.
Nearly 40 years later, yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, once they got into the field, they followed it for a good mile and a half to this vantage point called Barrow Mound, and there they had a clear view of the coast, and they could see from there was the beacon, there was the Orphan Nest Lighthouse. By now, they'd lost all communication with Central Security Control. Well, I suppose they would that far away. They hadn't had contact for 45 minutes, and they were getting concerned. But just as they were, the Central Security Control were about to send out a search party with the guys, that was about 3:30, 4:45. They're now on their way back, and they managed to get in contact with them again. So they're dazed and confused. They're making their way back and wondering whatever it was, what they're going to see. Now, on the way back to the base, something else happened. One of these blue orbs that are pretty well documented in the Rendlesham incident, especially the third night, and an incident that happened with Adrian Bustinser and John Burroughs, streaked past them, a big blue orb. They just crossed the creek from where they'd come from, and this big blue light come from the left through the trees that was there for a minute and streaked away. And that's in Burroughs' official witness statement. And while we're talking about statements, David, the only statement that was written by hand, I think, was John Burroughs. That's his statement. He knows it's his statement. He signed it and everything. All the rest were typed and they were just told to sign. So when it comes to statements, I think you can't really, apart from John's, I think you can take them with a pinch of salt. I think Jim said that the context of his statement was correct, but he'd written a 4-page statement and he was given a 1-page statement to say this is what happened to you.
Oh, I see.
So the cover-up's already started.
Yeah, so they probably left a lot out, and
Yeah. So anyway, that's how John Burroughs remember it. Now, Jim remembers it completely different. So, having suffered no ill effects from the blast, this is when the bright white light has silently exploded. He raised to his feet, and that was clear then there's no aircraft crash, and the bright sphere of light was in front of him. Penniston looked to the right and see Burroughs standing there, motionless. He shouted to Burroughs, but he gave no reaction. So whatever happened to John, he wasn't reacting to Jim. So the bright sphere of light had now dissipated, and to Jim's amazement, in place sat a triangular craft, how he's described it, of unknown origin, a craft of unknown origin. So he's approached the craft. John is out of it. No mention of Cabansack. So he's got to start his assessment. So although he's on the radio back to Central Security Control, he's not getting anything back, but he's still got to report what he's seeing. So he says the craft measured about 7 or 8 foot high, was approximately 9 foot at the base. No sound coming from the craft. No sign of any engines, no crew compartments, no windows, no doors. He looked for landing gear, couldn't see anything. He's hoping to see NASA or USAF or USSR written on the side, but instead of that, he came across some strange symbols, and they appeared to be etched into the craft itself. And Jim has said that they seemed familiar to him, but he couldn't work out why. You know, sometimes when you see something and you think, I've seen that before, or I know it, I think that's the best way to describe it.
Or you get a smell you recognise, and you think, where do I remember that from? Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So really, we've got
absolutely.
so time seems to have frozen for John, as far as according to Jim, and Jim is kind of looking at this craft.
Yeah. I think at one stage Jim said that he was bathed in a beam of white light, John was, but that might not have been Jim who said that. That could have been someone else who was saying that, so I don't want to go too much into that. But according to Jim, John wasn't responding, okay? So anyway, this is like no craft that Jim has ever seen before. He described it as being black, smooth and glass-like. He paced off the size of the craft. He's making notes in his police notebook and drawing the symbols. And if you've seen the notebook that he done all that in, certainly towards the end his handwriting gets really shaky. So anyway,
yeah. So something happened to him. Yeah,
something happened to him. Yeah. So the fabric of the craft seemed seamless, which in them days I don't think we had anything that was in the James Book of Aircraft that was seamless. It seemed like it was made of black glass. He started taking photographs. He had his camera with him. When you go to a crash investigation, you have your camera with you. He soon used up a full roll of his film. He's making the notes down. He's writing down what's in front of him, and he's looking at every angle. So when Penniston ran his hand over the craft, that felt smooth and warm to the touch. When he ran his hand over the symbols, that seemed like he was moving from smooth glass onto like a texture of sandpaper. So I suppose you could say that was etched into the craft. So Jim's now touched the symbols, and the light emanating from the craft intensified. So just like you're touching one of these lamps, when you touch it, the lamp come on, and that's come really bright, and I think it scared him a bit. And as he removed his hand, the light dissipated. And so there's something going on there, weren't there? Now he says after a while, the craft silently rose up off the ground, manoeuvred up and through the trees. You know how close them trees are together there. So we've got to say that had to be some sort of intelligence more than what we had at that time.
So at this point now, John is seeing this as well, that the craft has risen up. So
no, John's seeing nothing.
Oh, right, okay.
No.
I'm just thinking that maybe he's come out of his trance-like state or whatever, and he's seeing this craft.
Nope.
Right.
No, John can't remember seeing a craft at all.
Oh, right.
And neither can Cabansack. So anyway, he rose up off the ground, manoeuvred through the trees, and as the UFO was clear of the treetops, it shot off at impossible speed and was gone in the blink of an eye. Now, on the eve of the 30th anniversary Rendlesham Force incident, I don't know, was you there, David?
The 30th? No.
Yeah.
Probably not.
No, okay. So, Sergeant Jim Penniston revealed they'd been keeping a secret for 30 years. And he claimed that when he touched the symbols etched on the side of the craft, he received a telepathic binary code download. Thousands of ones and zeros flashing in front of his mind's eye. The next day at his Ipswich home, he says he couldn't get any peace, and he kept seeing these ones and zeros, and he couldn't get them out of his head, and he felt compelled to write them down, page after page, and I forget how many pages there are now, but lots and lots of pages of these ones and zeros that Jim said he thought were gibberish at the time. When he'd finished writing them down, he said he then felt at ease. So that's how Jim remembers the incident, and now we're left with Ed Cabansack, who we were told was left as a communication relay. But the problem we have with figuring out how Ed's part was in all this is that he's, like I said, he's kept himself very private. He's only given the odd interview and nothing for many years now. His official statement can be, like I said before, best part ignored. He claims he never made the statement. It contained errors, many errors. His statement was obviously written for him and typed. Ed couldn't type. And so it's for that reason I've selected my information from an interview that Ed conducted with Georgina Bruni for her book You Can't Tell the People. And Georgina Bruni got to interview most people. She done really well when you think at that time. I don't suppose her good looks were a hindrance, were they? No. She had General Williams knocking at her door, so I think that helped.
Yeah, I think at this point in time we should mention it's called You Can't Tell the People by Georgina Bruni. It's, I think you can probably still pick it up on Amazon, can't you? But I think it's...
Oh, you definitely pick it up on eBay.
I think it's pretty hard to get hold of as a new issue now, isn't it? It's,
I don't think you'll get a new issue. I think that, it went out of print many years ago, but they do surface.
Yeah.
And sometimes from time to time you pick one up cheap, and
That's
when
right.
I see them, I normally buy them. I've given more away. I don't think I've ever sold any, but if I see them for £3 or £4, I'll buy them and give them away. People are interested.
But anyone out there, that's the best, one of the best books to get with, it's very detailed with the whole incident.
Yeah, because she did get to speak to witnesses. She got to speak to just about everyone. Not everyone, but just about everyone. So, Colonel Holt had told Georgina that Ed had a responsible position in government and that she'd never get to hear from him. But that wasn't true. He never had a job with the government. Maybe Colonel Holt was trying to protect Ed because he knew he didn't want to speak to anyone. When Ed had spoke to people, bad things happened to him, like an investigation by the ISS, the Inland Revenue people. And so I think that was more why he didn't want to get involved anymore. He just thought that, he wanted to forget it all, and he'd spoken out a couple of times. And he weren't going to talk. But when Georgina contacted him, she found the opposite. He was willing to talk to him. So he told Georgina that he remembers being in Colonel Holt's office on the morning of the 26th, absolutely terrified, because people think, because it's hard to explain what I'm trying to explain now, because Colonel Holt was the deputy base commander, high figure on them, not much happened without him knowing about it. They assume that everyone knows him, but they didn't. I was surprised recently when Adrian told me he didn't know who Holt was at that time.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, he probably wouldn't have come in contact with the men on, unless he was actually directly involved with something with them, would he?
No, probably not. And 4,000 people, you're not going to get to know everyone, especially 18-year-old recruits.
I've got a question here, actually, and it's just struck me. Did John and Jim know each other before this incident very well, or did they know of each other?
I can't answer that, Dave, though. I really don't know.
No, sorry. It's just something that came to mind.
Yeah, I should imagine they would have done, because Jim had been there for a fair while beforehand. I mean,
he'd been in for about 7 years before nearly those, I think.
Yeah, and John had been there for 17 months, so yeah, I should think that's...
They probably crossed paths,
They crossed paths, even though John was law enforcement and Jim was security police. I'm sure they would have done, yeah. Although, this thing about different flights, and I've spoken to different airmen and said, well, surely you'd know you're on the base, and they've told me we didn't even know everyone who was on our flight. They just didn't. A flight would have been made up of 50 or 60 or 70 personnel, and they just didn't know everyone, especially if you imagine different flights mingling together and new people coming and going all the while. You just wouldn't know everyone, would you? I suppose you're too busy going about your daily duty anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Ed was only young. You can imagine him. I think he was about 18, something like that, and he's ended up in Colonel Holt's office, and he was absolutely terrified. Now, before he'd gone in Colonel Holt's office, because he knew he had to go there and speak to him, he was warned by people who had been there a while, and they just said, look, Ed, just do as you're told, sign what you're told to sign, get out of there, forget about it, otherwise you're only going to make trouble for yourself. And for the best part, that's what he'd done. But he told Georgina he was so nervous he would have signed anything. And he can't even remember signing anything, and he can't remember reading anything. So that's how terrified he was.
Something else just came to mind, sorry, I'm butting in again. There were reports of missing time. Is that, do you see that as a true thing with John and Jim?
Well, when they got back to the base, I think their watches were 45 minutes out of sync from what the others are. So maybe there was missing time,
Yeah.
Who knows? Or maybe, whatever it was, the phenomena, stopped their watches,
Which kind of, when you look at John not remembering what happened and Jim, seeing the craft and everything, maybe something did happen there that he was frozen in time somehow. I know it's like an old science fiction movie, but who knows? I mean, it's there's certainly questions that need to be asked, aren't there, and answered. If they've got sort of 45 minutes missing time, I mean, that's not That is something we hear about a lot with UFO incidents.
Well, we hear about it in Rendlesham as well, because I know plenty of people have had missing time. And also, in my case, I ended up somewhere, I turned a corner in the forest and ended up miles away, and I was with someone, so, and we know the forest like the back of our hand. So there's weird things go on in that forest to this day.
I remember Brenda told me a story about she ended up she knows that forest like the back of her hand, doesn't she? And she ended up in a strange part of the forest, and they were missing for about 2 hours, wandering around this strange part of the forest. Yeah, that was a few years ago. Yeah, a similar thing happened to me and my, I'm going to say my friend Tracy Munger from Norwich. She's a paranormal investigator. We just turned a right and we ended up miles away. Not miles away, but a long, long way away from where we should have been. And weird, also a dog went missing there once, and ended up miles away from where it should have been, only a few minutes afterwards. So, that's weird. If you're going to venture into that Rendlesham forest, don't go alone. Well, I used to, David. I used to go there. I wouldn't say I was obsessed, but I used to go there quite a lot until one nasty incident happened to me, and then that put me off a bit. But when I look back now and think, whatever was I thinking about? No flashlight, no lights on your phones, because there weren't phones back in them days. I must have been absolutely bloody mad. But anyway, let's go on about Ed Kabanchak, what he remembers. So, at the beginning of the incident, what he remembers mirrors what Penniston and Burroughs did. They grew up to a point where they've entered the Rendlesham forest, expecting to find a downed aircraft. They pursued the lights for a while, they climbed the berm, which they climbed before they confronted whatever it was. And on the other side, Ed Kabanchak says, John Burroughs drew his 38. This is Ed saying this. He drew his 38 and then they all passed out. That's what Ed remembers. He remembers seeing the unusual coloured lights as they entered the forest. He remembers the radios acting up. We know Jim says that he posted him back with a vehicle tracked as a communication relay, but Ed don't remember ever being separated from the patrol. So I'll just read this bit, and that's out of Georgina Bruni's, because I don't know any other better way to explain it. So this is Ed speaking to Georgina. He says, because I was new and probably green, I thought it was some sort of prank or fraternity thing, like they do in college. I recall being assigned to Security 1, driving Penniston over to the East Gate and meeting up with Burroughs and Stephens. We thought it was going to be a downed aircraft. It was Burroughs who made the report. We had to wait for Master Sergeant Chandler to meet us because we had to hand our weapons over to him and get permission to proceed further. He says, I've read all that stuff about me being a comlink, but I can't remember any of that. I remember being with Penniston and Burroughs. There were only the three of us. Sergeant Chandler stayed back with the jeep. We all saw something, and I kept thinking this is a joke. But as we got closer and closer, we could see a light, and our radio transmissions were cutting out. I remember what I saw. It was to the right of the lighthouse, so now he must be talking about when they were up on Barrow Hill. This is interesting because his description is nothing like the other two. It was cone-shaped, X-shaped, with lights running round its belt from left to right. They were blue, red and white lights, flashing, sometimes rapid, sometimes slow. Then we saw flakes of metal coming off of it. Now this is similar to what Colonel Holt says about that.
Colonel Holt said he saw it in the farmer's field, didn't he? He says it's difficult to describe. We were all trying to make sure what we had seen. It wasn't the lighthouse. He said he saw the lighthouse. This wasn't it. It was to the right of the lighthouse. So that's what he told Georgina Bruni. But like I've said before, Ed he hasn't any recollection of ever seeing a landed object in the forest or pursuing it for 2 miles. But we know he ended up on there because he said that he could see the lighthouse from his vantage point. So he got very concerned after reading Sergeant Penniston's account of what happened to realise that he's got memory loss. And this is something that most I spoke to, John Burroughs, Adrian Bustinza, Ed Kabanchak, they've all got memory loss. They've all got parts that they still can't quite work out how it happened. maybe Jim has.
I think even Chuck does, because when I was speaking, he has some problems with remembering exactly where it was and everything. So I'm Chuck. I mean, Colonel Holt.
I think more than that, though, David. I think perhaps something happened either before or after, or because of what they saw, that has erased their memories because they just can't remember. Ed was told not to discuss it, and he thinks that they blocked it from his memory. Well, if they blocked it from his memory, that tells me that he was debriefed. Must have been. Yeah. So Ed says that I'm very confused. I may have been with Chandler, but then I can't remember separating from Burroughs and Penniston. And he just says, why can't I just recall? And this is something that I hear a lot from Adrian. He just can't recall, and he's got a blank, and the more he try and think, the more upsetting that is for him. You can understand why these people don't come forward.
No, I know he's suffered quite a lot over the years, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Well,
so he says, he says he really don't remember about the thing landing, and that's it. So that would appear that Ed could recall what happened before, he can recall parts of the incident, but in between, he'd either experienced missing time or his memory had been altered or erased. You know, there's a big chunk of missing time there for Cabansack. He just can't remember getting back in the vehicle and returning to the base either. You know, that's really weird, because when I'm jumping forward now, and I don't really want to do this, but just briefly, on the third night, Adrian Bustinzer had an incident with John. Neither of them two can remember getting back to the base, how they got back there even.
Yeah, that's weird.
They knew they got back there. Weird, yeah. Yeah, so he says that Colonel Holt didn't coerce him into denying the incident or anything like that. But they did sort of make out that was the lighthouse beacon. You know, so who were they? Who were they? We don't know. So he claims he was never interviewed by the AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. I don't think John has ever said that he was interrogated, I suppose you call it an interrogation by him. Well, I don't think he has. We know Jim has. Jim has said he was investigated up to 14 times, but I do know that he was a senior officer at the time, wasn't he? So, like, when John got back, he just said he let Jim do the talking.
Yeah, could well, but I think Jim said to let him do the talking as well, didn't he? So maybe that's the reason.
Well, yeah, he would do. He's the boss, isn't he? I mean, no one's going to admit to a UFO. I mean, that would have been the end of their career for definite, wouldn't it? No one wanted to know about that. And it's a bit awkward because something serious went on. The base didn't seem as if that was in danger, so I suppose he gave them the bare minimum of what he could do. But there was other people there who had it in their mind. They were going to tell him what they was going to say from now on.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing, as far as Ed Cabansack was concerned, and I've heard this from several people, Adrian included, he was promoted to a day job straight afterwards. He was still assigned to sea flight, but he feels that was so they could keep an eye on him. You know, after the incident, Adrian got special treatment. He was sent all over on, you know, these, where they go away. I forget what the technical term for it is now, but, you know, they send him on, location at different places, and he got some real special treatment. But he always felt, I think they call it TDI, special treatment to get him out of the way so that no one could speak to him. So something was happening there. There was a cover-up.
Adrian Bustinzer had an incident a few years before going to Bedwaters, didn't he?
Yeah, another Air Force base. So I think it was California. Yeah, in California. Yeah, but he said that he definitely saw a craft that was like on the area where the aircraft were, but no one spoke about it afterwards, and that was never brought up again. But he definitely had an incident. Yeah, very much similar to what, you know, he experienced there.
Right.
So as far as that goes, I think that's night one covered.
Yeah, I was going to say there, while you take your breath, I'll just say, I think we'll have a little break there. You're listening to the Paranormal UK radio network. I'm talking to Ronnie Dugdale. We're doing a Rendlesham special, trying to get to as many facts and figures as we possibly can through Ronnie's expert research. Colonel Charles Holt is returning to Woodbridge on the 8th of September 2019. It's a Sunday. Tickets are £20 for an all-day UFO event with other great speakers. If you'd like tickets, please get in touch with me. This is my email address. It's davidyoung2qn@yahoo.co.uk. It's going to be a great event, and there's a few tickets left, but they are going quickly, so you need to act fast. Thank you. Right. Okay, so we covered the first night, basically, Ronnie, but where did we go from so we need to do like what happened next, like reporting and everything, don't we, to be covered?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, Jim and John had to report something. They were out in the forest most of the night, weren't they? So they had to say something. Neither of them really wanted to go into much detail, because, you know, the UFOs are a pretty taboo subject and not what we could call career enhancing, are they? But
no.
Jim was a senior officer, so John just sat back and let Jim do the talking. He just let him get on with it. He was a sergeant. And John didn't want to say anything. So that would have been reported at the shift commander's office in the morning. And then I suppose what we need to talk about is how Colonel Holt came to find out about all this. He was the deputy base commander, weren't he?
Yeah, and he wasn't, and I don't think he believed in UFOs or anything anyway, did he, at that point?
No, I've heard him say, you know, at conferences that the only interest he had was as a child. He picked up a couple of UFO books and found them interesting, read them, and that was it. Didn't believe in them, never seen anything, had no experience of them, shall we say. You know, he hadn't never encountered anything like that, so he thought, you know, that was probably all a load, at that time, was a load of rubbish.
Well, it's interesting to point out, though, but wasn't there a few other incidents, apparently, that were reported before the actual RFI incident?
Oh, there was. Yeah, there was. I mean, how much of that got back to Colonel Holt, I don't know. There was instances that happened before John and Jim's did during that day, but they claimed out about it. They weren't going to tell anyone, you know, because they just weren't career enhancing. And as young airmen, some of them have told me that when they first got there, they were told that if they saw lights in the sky, if they saw unusual activity, don't call it in, because it'll only make trouble for yourself. And that was from the more senior people there. So yeah, there's a history of lights and different strange happenings over the air bases going back years and years before, to the 50s, you know.
As I say, and certainly in the woods and everything, because there was a lot of like witchcraft and stuff in the area, as I understand.
Well, yes, so I understand as well, but I think a lot of what they were told, this is just what I think, David, I might not be right, I think a lot of what they were told was to keep them away from the village and to keep them out of the woods, because they didn't want airmen going into the local pubs and telling people anything what was going on. So a lot of that could have been that. I mean, that's just my own thoughts. That has been said that Butley Village was the place where witchcraft started. I suppose there's plenty of places in Britain make that claim as well. Yeah. But for certain, there are covens to this day that meet in them woods. You know, it's been going on for years. That's a place where they go and have these rituals. So there is some truth in that. And also, airmen have told me that they've been chased from the woods before, you know, in fear of their lives from these people who are doing these ceremonies. So there's, you know, no smoke without fire.
I suppose that goes outside of the parameters of what we're talking about, really. But it's interesting to note that there's been quite a long history in Rendlesham Woods of weird stuff going on.
Oh yeah, they were told all sorts.
To this day, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So anyway, as part of Charles Holt's duties, being a deputy base commander, he used to go down to the security desk in the morning and pick up the blotters, and the blotters would be all the activity that happened the previous day, but for the previous 24 hours, and then he'd take them to his boss and they'd discuss anything that needed acting on and stuff like that. So at 5:45 a.m. on the Friday the 26th of December. Early in the morning there, Charles Holt went into the security desk, and the person behind the desk was Sergeant Crush McCabe. And so as Colonel Holt walked in, he started chuckling and laughing, and Colonel Holt said, you know, what's the joke? What's so funny? Well, you know, let me in on the joke. And McCabe said, well, Burroughs and Penniston and Cabansack were out in Rendlesham Forest all night chasing a UFO. But the flight commander told me not to put anything in the blotter. And so Holt said, well, you've got to put something in the blotter, you know. We have any comebacks? we've got to report something. So he asked what precisely happened. And so McCabe said, well, something strange happened out there. They saw some strange lights, and they think they saw something they couldn't explain. So Colonel Holt, he knew Jim Penniston had been in the Air Force for quite a few years then, and John Burroughs, he'd been in for, I think, 17 months before this incident.
I think Jim joined in 73, I think, or something like that. Yeah,
I don't know how long he was at Bentwaters, I'm not sure, but when Jim comes on your show, I'm sure he can tell you all them facts. But the point is, he considered them both credible. And so we told McCabe, you've got to put something in the blotter. So put something in, like they went out into the forest and they saw some strange lights and they went out there to investigate. And so that was it. Away Charles Holt goes. So now there's an incident that's not widely known that happened on the evening of the 26th. So we're now on the Boxing Day evening going into the morning of the 27th of December. And this happened down on at the East Gate. So that's later in that same day, later that evening, and Laurie Bowen, she's a young airman, we do call them airmen, even though they're ladies. She's on at the back gate RAF Woodbridge to do a midnight shift, which is 11 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the morning. Now, that gate was normally, under normal circumstances, that would have been shut after 6 o'clock, some say 8 o'clock, but anyway, that was shut around about tea time. And because that was the reason why John Burroughs went down there to check the gate to make sure it was locked. So on this night, she's posted on there. And one can only assume she was posted down there because of the activity that happened the day before. Maybe they wanted to keep an eye on things. So anyway, in the early hours of the morning, Laurie watched, there's this big red orangey coloured sphere with a blue-white corona to it, slowly passed over the runway. Well, if you know the East Gate is on the south side of the Woodbridge runway. Over on the north side is some more forest, very, very dark part of the forest. There's nothing there. Down at the end of the runway, you've got the Folly House where some residents live. So she watches big, huge orb of light go over and just descend down into the forest, and that spooked her a bit. She was really scared because she's down there on her own. Remember, she's only 18. To be down there in the dark, I mean, if there was no flying going on, the runway lights would have been off. That would have been pitch black. And at that time, they only had a little tiny wooden guard shack. You know, that was terrifying. People have been on that post, even men, said they used to sit with their back to the door and the feet up so that no one could get in the door, because they'd heard all these stories about East End Charlie and you know, ghosts and little monks and all these things like that. So she's terrified. So she picked up the phone and she rang the desk sergeant and told him what she'd seen. And she said she was really scared and could they send someone down, because she was terrified on her own. So the next thing she remembers, John Tremontosi turned up, and he was police 5, I think, at the time. And they sat there listening to their Motorola radio. But earlier, getting back to what you were saying before, other things happened. Earlier that day, Tremontosi and 4 of his colleagues, they'd been seeing strange lights over the forest even then. This was during the day. The lights would just appear and then they'd switch off, and then they'd be somewhere else and they'd switch off, and, you know, there was just really, really weird lights. And I think someone commented, I can't remember who it was now, but anyway, commented that they were seeing these lights and they wondered if the UK celebrated New Year's Day a different day to them. So they're seeing these lights. So stuff had been going on all through the day. When they were doing their security checks along the flight line, they were noticing all these lights up in the sky. And Tremontosi says they were red, green and white. They notified the control tower that there were lights, they weren't like aircraft lights blinking, and they were just steady lights. And, just told them, something's going on, but they were just told to do nothing about it. So anyway, while they're, she's called it in, Tremontosi's come down to the guard shack, and the flight chief that night was Lieutenant Bonnie Templin, and she's on her way over to Woodbridge I've got a brain freeze.
That's all right.
With Sergeant Bob Ball. So there's a lot to remember.
No, there's so much. It's so complex, and if you sort of go off track, you start losing your way, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Yeah. So anyway, she's on her way over to Woodbridge because she had heard that there's something going on and had landed in the woods at, north of the runway, and she's coming to investigate it. Now, while she's on her way there, a light entered one of these orbs of light entered her vehicle and causing her to go off the road and crash. And Laurie Bowen and Trevor Toosey are listening on the Motorola radio, and they can hear her in a distressed state, and she's shouting out, Bob, where are you? I can't see you, Bob. Where are you? I can't see anything. She sounded really scared to death. So, I can't go in the next bit anyway. So Lieutenant Templeton, she was so freaked out by what happened that she was sent back home, put it that way. Yeah, she was relieved of duty. So yeah, something happened. There was something happened further when someone picked her up off the road and said she was in a distressed state, and she was shouting, they're in there, they're in there, they're in there. And this person has told me that Bob Ball was in a dazed state as well. So, you know, there's not really much known about it. Bonnie Champlin,
like I say,
talk about it.
It's not a lot known about that. I mean, for a while, you only hear about it like the first night and the third night, don't you? And
I've only picked up bits and pieces off different people. You know, the person who was on the Butley Gate has told me that yes, she did go over there and that she did turn a jeep over, which weren't known at the time. Some people say that she discharged a firearm at it. You know, whatever it was, you know, that was freaking her out. And then another person who said that she was sent to collect her and Bob Ball up, Sergeant Bob Ball, said that she was in a terrible state, shaken and terrified and not making any sense. So anyway, the next little known thing what happens is on the Saturday afternoon, and base commander at that time was called Ted Conrad, and he'd heard obviously about the previous night's incidents with Burroughs and Penniston, and he makes his way over to Monroe Neville's house. It's now about 4:00 in the afternoon, and Bruce England knocks on his door, goes in, and he's saying to Monroe Neville's, is there anyone else here? You know, is there anyone who'll understand what I'm trying to tell you? And he said, well, no, I've just got my 3-year-old daughter, and England is saying, well, will she understand what I'm saying? He said, well, I don't know until you tell me. And so he said that he was there under the orders of Base Commander Ted Conrad, and he said that London Tower had contacted Tower at Woodbridge Base and had asked them to identify the object that was above them because it was on their radar, and they couldn't determine what it was. And then Lieutenant England told Monroe Neville's that one of the airmen, and we assume that's John Burroughs, had been abducted into the spacecraft in Rendlesham Forest. And so he said he wanted him to go out into the forest with him. He knew where the landing site was, and he wanted to do an investigation, and if they thought that warranted any further investigation, they were to go and see Colonel Conrad, and then they'll evaluate the situation, and they'd decide whether it needs to be investigated further. So anyway, they set off to the forest. It's now about 4:30, and first they had to drive over to Bentwater's base to leave the little girl who was at the chaplain's house with Monroe's wife. So that sort of like locks the day in, because the next day would have been the Sunday, and they were over the chaplain's house getting ready for the Sunday service. So he takes with him his camera, because Monroe Neville's was like an amateur photographer. He worked for the base newspaper from time to time. They took a starlight scope and a pair of night vision goggles or a scope of some type. And when they arrived at the forest, the shift commander for B-Flight England knew exactly where the site was, so he'd obviously been out there that morning. We know that they went out to the site that morning, because some of the shift that finished at early hours in the morning went out there to have a look afterwards to see what all the fuss was about. And there were several of the officers there investigating it and checking it out with the Geiger counters, and they were looking at scorched branches and things like that. So anyway, they're now in the forest, and it's about 7 or 8 o'clock, and it's already dark because it's winter time. And as they started head towards the east gate, Monroe noticed the bright light in the forest. So when they looked into the forest, that through the scope, that appeared as a bright green light. You know what them night vision scopes look like? It just looked like a heat source. And he said that appeared to be something like an eyeball. He said it was very green, with a dark centre, and it looked like a pupil of an eye, and that's a bit like what Charles Holt describes later when he has his encounter. He said it would pulsate very slowly, and what happened, when you'd get out of the Jeep, that would like react, that would become brighter, and when you got back in the Jeep, that would dim down, so that was obviously some sort of intelligent control there. So by that time there was an electrostatic charge, and hairs on their arms and heads were standing up, so they knew that was something that needed investigating, and so they then go make their way back to the Woody's bar where they were having a Christmas party, so that they can tell Conrad. Now, the interesting thing about this, David, is that Colonel Holt didn't seem to know anything about this. You know, when they arrived at the Christmas party, that seemed like Holt thought that was he was getting the team together, didn't know anything about Monroe Neville's encounter, shall we call it? Yeah. So that's quite interesting. Colonel Holt might say it never happened, but this is what Monroe Neville say. So anyway, Monroe Neville then says that they turned up at the Woodbridge Officers Club and called for the maitre d', and he called Colonel Conrad, and Colonel Conrad ushered them both into a little room. Monroe says he saw Colonel Holt there. He saw Colonel Conrad. He thinks Williams was there as well, and Ziegler from the security police, and they discussed a bit of what they'd seen, and Conrad said, "Do you think that warrants further investigation?" And he said, "Yes, sir, most definitely." So that's that little incident taken care of, I suppose we could call it that.
Yeah.
So what they were doing, that was officers of the combat support group, and they were midway through their cover-dish dinner. That was a party where families were there to celebrate Christmas, get a pat on the back for their achievements and stuff like that. Yeah. So when this happened, Colonel Conrad said he still had things that he had to do. He had to give some awards and everything. So he said to Colonel Holt, you better.
Hello? So I lost you.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah. And so, so Colonel Holt then ushered England into the cloakroom out of the earshot of everyone and asked him, a little bit more about it. And he said, how did he know that there was, there was something out there? And he said that some people had seen lights out in the forest and they'd been spooked by it. So, with Conrad, by this time he's fed up with all the talk of UFOs, and so he said to Holt, get a team and out you go. So Holt then contacted the disaster preparedness unit and asked who the on-call officer, who their standby person was, and she said that was Sergeant Monroe Neville's. Well, that seems really weird, that if Monroe Neville's was there and was telling him, why would he be asking? So there's weird things throughout this case that don't make any sense at all, but that's one of them. So Holt knew Neville's well. He'd been on exercises with him in the past. He knew Neville's was a keen photographer. He knew he had his own darkroom, so he thought he'd be a good bloke to come along. And so Holt talked to the commander, Major Ziegler, and asked who else was available. And he said Master Sergeant Bob Ball was available. Well, poor old Bob Ball, he'd been working every shift over Christmas, and so now he's going to get dragged into it again. And someone did mention to me, whenever anything was going off, Sergeant Ball always seemed to be there. Well, he would be if they were calling on him, wouldn't he? So he drew the short straw, I suppose. So Colonel Holt asked for Bob Ball if he could collect him at his house in like 30 minutes. So he made his way over his house because Holt was in his suit and changing into his fatigues. And he wanted to collect his portable micro cassette tape recorder, and that's a good job he did, because the Holt tape that's infamous now. Yeah. If it hadn't been for that, I don't think anyone would have believed anything.
Historical record now, isn't it?
Historical, yeah. And spare batteries, and he did say when he first hit the conference circuit, 2 tapes, he clicked 2 tapes. So Master Sergeant Ball picked up Colonel Holt from his home. They drove over to the disaster preparedness to collect Monroe Neville's, and then they had to make their way to Liverpool because Jeep needed gassing up. So when they got there was some airmen trying to fuel up the light oils, and there were some problems there because some people were saying they were out of gas and some people were saying they were full, and argument pursued. Anyway, they wouldn't work properly anyway. So Bob Ball drove out of Bentwaters through the village of Ike towards Woodbridge. They took a shortcut across the runway, which was something they'd done quite often out of the East Gate. And then they took the same route as what Penistone and Burroughs had taken at the bottom of the East Gate, and they turned right. Yeah. So they went out into the Forest Service Road.
It wasn't left then, Johnny.
Sorry?
It wasn't left then. No, it's all right. It wasn't left at Eastgate, then it was right.
No, there's never left at Eastgate, was it? No. I know where you're coming from, but no, let's just forget about that. Yeah, so they definitely turned right. If they'd have turned left, they would have ended up back at Bentwaters, wouldn't they? So, they finally, arrive at, down that Logan Road. There's a little clearing which they called, like a meeting point, you know, so that's where all the vehicles were parked. When Colonel Holt got out there, he was horrified to find out there's about 30 or 40 personnel running around everywhere. There were vehicles and light halls parked up. Some of the light halls had just been collected from the motor pole. They still weren't working. I don't think they ever got them working. And that was complete confusion. So when Holt gets there, he's thinking, what the hell is going on? You know, the English are going to think it's crazy Americans running around in the Queen's Forest. And, you know, that he just thought there was going to be a disaster. So he ordered everyone else to stay back at the staging post, which is where the vehicles were parked, to be quiet, and he didn't want them to draw attention to themselves. So that was really unusual that a light hall should fail, because they're fairly foolproof, you know, they're like diesel generators with a light on top, and, you know, they never really went wrong, but something was interacting with them and they weren't working that night. So then, Adrian Bustinza, he's attempting to contact security control because he'd been and collected some of these light halls and they still weren't working. And he can be heard on the Holt tape down at the East Gate, and he's ordering up more light halls and asking for fuel, and he can clearly, be heard on there. I think he says something like, Sergeant Bustinza, we're all out of gas, we're at the East Gate over, something like that. But, because Colonel Holt has said that Bustinza never left his side. Well, in the early days, he said he wasn't there at all. Then that went to, he never left his side, but, I mean, there's proof there on the Holt tape that he must have left his side at one time, because he then went from there, at that point, back to the Woodbridge base to get some light oil, so he definitely weren't with him all the time. Anyways, that's not that important, but it's important that he couldn't have been with him all the while. So Holt has now become really impatient. The light oil still won't work, and there's no progress being made, and so he decided he's going to commence the investigation. And so Lieutenant Bruce England, he knew where the landing site was and took Holt straight there. So in the meantime, John Burroughs can be heard on the Holt tape, and he arrives at the East Gate. Now, John Burroughs weren't even on duty that night. He's in his civilians, but in his civilian clothes. He was restless. He felt like something was going to happen, something was going to come back. He went down to the law enforcement desk where the person there told him that there was stuff kicking off again down in the forest, and told him about Bonnie Templin being relieved of duty and stuff like that. And so he wanted to get in on the action, I suppose. So him and two of his friends, they went down to the East Gate, and he can be heard on the Holt tape asking, can he join them? And Bob Bull says, no, not at this time. He didn't, and Colonel Holt didn't want anyone out there at all. While John Burroughs was at the staging area, a blue light shot down into the clearing where they stood milling around, and shot towards them. Now, that's the only time I think when the light halls worked, because as it passed by the light halls that had previously proved impossible to start, they all came up and bathed the whole area in white light, and as it went past the light halls, it went out again. But that's one of these lights went inside the truck where law enforcement Chris Arnold was sitting, and then shot straight through the vehicle. So, you know, how can a light pass through a vehicle? Well, it did, you know, there was plenty of people who saw that happen. So, Lieutenant England knew his way to the landing site. That might seem like I'm jumping all over the place. Very difficult to I'm trying not to miss anything out, David, alright?
I know,
yeah.
That's why I'm trying to keep quiet, really.
Yeah, okay, yeah. That's difficult. I really don't want to miss, because it's important that all the facts are out there. Yeah. Right, so Lieutenant England seemed to know his way to the landing site, and so they made their way towards there. When they got to the site, they found there was 3 indentations that all looked identical. They were equal distance apart, and they were about foot in diameter, 3 or 4 inches deep. And they were milling around and they were measuring. And if anyone listening hasn't heard the whole tape, they really should have a listen to it. And you can hear them on there. They're taking the clicks with the Geiger counter, and they're measuring and taking samples and things like that. So anyway, there they are at the site, and they're taking these measurements. And the measurements in the middle of where the landing site was, that they peaked, and on the inside of the trees they peaked. So whatever it was, what was there, definitely left some radiation behind. Now you've got to remember, this is 24 hours after it happened, so the radiation readings we were told were 10 times higher than background, which isn't much, but they're still higher than background, so something was there. But what the radiation would have been at the time, we can only guess, can't we? Sure. So anyway, they're looking up through the tree canopy, and there's a gap where it looked like something had came down, the limbs were broken off. Some were bent downwards. Some of the branches on the inside of the landing site were scuffed as if something had scraped against them. And so I think from that we can definitely say whatever it was, what was there, something was in the forest that night, weren't there?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So as they're examining the landing site, all of a sudden the nearby farm animals go into a frenzy, and there's the airmen listening to all this over the airwaves. They hear all this, all barnyard animals, and the wild animals in the forest. They were spooked by something, and they said there was animals running everywhere, but you could hear the farm animals everywhere. Something had disturbed them. So while this was all going on, one of the groups spots a light glowing in the forest, and that's like the one what Monroe Neville's had seen. That was a bright light with a darker centre. I think Colonel Holt said it was a red light. And Colonel Holt described it like an eye with a pupil winking at you. So from time to time it emit bright flashes, and at times it appeared to be approaching them, other times it appeared to be going away. But whatever it was, you can hear them on the whole tape, and they're saying this is weird. There's something they weren't used to or prepared for. So they watched it for a couple of 3 minutes. At one point it moved towards them, receded away, and it went out into the farmer's field. This is the farmer's field at some people call Capel Green. So they watched it there for a bit, and Colonel Holt suggested that they approach a little bit closer. The black centre appeared like an eye winking at you, but it also appeared to be shedding what Colonel Holt describes as molten metal, like from a steel furnace, in the molten state. And so now they're getting pretty excited. In the window of the farmer's house, which was directly across the field, they could see the object reflecting in the windows and flickering, and it almost looked like the building was on fire. And Colonel Holt said he was very concerned for whoever was in the building because, it wasn't far from the house. So they then moved over further towards the farmer's house to see if they could see anything. They scanned the skyline and the sky. Looked at, I missed a bit out, that's important. It's not on the tape, but I must go into it. So if I just tell you that while they're in the forest and this thing is inside the field, they're looking at it, and suddenly that silently exploded like a starburst, like a firework. Mm-hmm. No, that's not on the Holt tape anywhere, but that's what Colonel Holt said it was. I think he says it exploded into 5 white objects much smaller, and they just disappeared. So now they've moved further across the farmer's field because they want to see if there's any residue or anything left there, but they couldn't find anything in the field, only that cows had been in there, if you know what I mean. So they're scanning the sky and looking to the north, 30 to 40 degrees off the horizon. They saw elliptical objects, 3 or 4 of them, moving at really high speed and sharp angular movements, and we had nothing that could fly like that. I don't think we have now, where they can stop dead and then just shoot out at a different angle. But that's how he described it, and they had multiple coloured lights on them. And then suddenly they turned into full round objects. So like it had been eclipsed before, and now they're round objects. So they watched these objects for a few minutes, and they went into the second farmer's field, which is over the road. And while they're there, one of these objects came over them and shot down what we would call nowadays like a laser beam. right at their feet. They must have terrified them. It was just feet away from them. This beam was about 10 to 12 inches. It weren't like a torch beam or anything. It didn't radiate out. That was something like no one had seen in them days, I suppose. And they didn't, Colonel Holt didn't know, was it a warning? Was it a threat? They didn't know what they were encountering. So the beam stopped, as quick as it came, that went off with the light came off as well, just clicked off, Colonel Holt says. And, but 2 objects stayed in the south and 3 or 4 stayed to the sky in the north. They crossed past the farmer's house, crossed over the road, they stumbled into a stream and they all got soaking wet. So cold and wet and feeling miserable. Keep in mind that was December, freezing cold, and you know what the East Coast is like. Yeah. That was now approaching 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Colonel Holt says that they decided they'd had enough. No one seemed interested in investigations, and Holt said nobody would believe him anyway, and so he says that they made their way back. So anyway, when Colonel Holt and his party arrived back at the staging post, most of the men had already gone home, but there's still a few men there, and John Burroughs was still there. And he had earlier, like I said, he tried to join Holt's party, but he'd been refused permission. Holt didn't want no one else out there with him. So Holt approached John and started telling him what they'd seen. And he pointed to the sky where there were a couple of these lights still flying around. And Master Sergeant Bob Ball's pointing at them too. And they watched one of these blue lights shoot over towards a Bentwaters base. And Colonel Holt says that was in the direction of the Bentwaters weapons storage area. I think he says now that he'd learnt that because of the chatter on the radios. They all had radios on. They would have had 3 different radio nets, and he said he heard the chatter that was in the weapons storage area. Whether it was or whether it weren't, that was in that general direction. And John has said yes, there was a beam in that general direction. So they were hearing this on the radio. So Holt's really, really concerned, and he said, well, no one's ever going to believe any of it. He says the security radio in the weapons storage area went nuts, but I think people who were in the weapons storage area said, no, nothing happened. Well, one's right and one's wrong. You have to make your own mind which one you go with until any other evidence come forward, which is unlikely after all this while. So anyway, while all this was going on, over in the distance there was an orange object, and John called it a light, and that was skirting the tree lines, and that appeared to drop down in the trees, like to land it in the clearing. And Colonel Holt looked at John and asked him if that was what he'd seen on the first night. So John said he wasn't sure. I think he wanted to have a good look at it anyway, so he was going to say that. And he really needed to have a closer look. So Colonel Holt cleared Adrian Bustinza and John to go forward. So as Burroughs and Bustinza started to move towards the object, it started moving towards them. So John says they took off running towards her. John grabbed the radio from Bustinza and he's talking to the weapons storage area and asking her could he have permission to get close to the object, and they said that was okay. So as they're running towards her, Bustinza says he felt like he was pushed down to the ground and held to the ground, and it felt like he was being held to the ground. John can remember getting really close to the lights, maybe a foot or 2 away. He said he couldn't see a craft, but he described it like a fog, an orangish fog, and like an orangish ball of bright light in the centre of it. And that's all he can remember. All of a sudden he's standing there and it's gone. And Adrian is back in the distance and starting to stand up. And Adrian says he saw it come over the top of John, and he described it like a teleport device in Star Trek, where it's all like snowy, like a snowy TV screen. He says, and John faded away and he was gone, and he was disappeared, and he was gone for a full 5 minutes. So Bustinza said that John disappeared into the middle of it and it suddenly exploded. The blue lights were around it and it turned into a triangular object for a minute too. Now, I know a lot of people have probably never heard this before, but all what I'm now telling you is what Adrian has told me, and he's checked it, he's read it, and he said, yeah, there's lots of it. He still can't remember, but he's 100% on that part. And like I say, John can't really remember what happened. And also, both of them, Adrian said that when John had disappeared in the middle of it, the blue lights were still all around it. John can't remember anything about that. All he can remember is he went under something and then that was gone, and then he stood in the field wondering what the hell had happened. So Colonel Holt don't say anything about this. Remember in the early days he denied that Bustinza and Burroughs were there at all. So whatever happened, either Colonel Holt can't remember either, or that's something they just don't want bringing up.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe he knew someone was out there, but maybe he didn't actually realise it was Bustinza until it was heard on the tape, you know. Because hasn't John got a theory that maybe Holt might have been protecting him as well? You know, protecting him from something?
Well, I've thought that. I don't know if John has ever thought that.
Well, it's just a theory,
Now, you know, in the early days, maybe, but there's like a history of Colonel Holt protecting people in this, you know, like, or trying to keep reporters away from him. Maybe he was just being protective, you know, I'm not sure.
Maybe he was trying to keep the heat off himself in the long run, because I suppose the more people that start talking to other people, you know, involved in the whole incident, if you like, it's going to draw incident, because they're going to then go on to him being the sort of officer in charge, aren't they? Maybe, you know, so maybe he's trying to keep the heat off himself more than anything else. Excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, there's only Colonel Holt. I mean, Colonel Holt says he weren't debriefed at all. You know, I wonder. You know, I wonder. We don't.
As I say, it's certainly some questions that I think need to be. I mean, when the conference happens in September, I think there's probably a few questions that we'll probably get asked about stuff like that, and see what he says. You know.
Yeah, I think I have sort of tried to ask questions before and I've got part answers, but nothing that's really made me think, well, that explains that, because nothing explains anything. I think for certain that they've all got problems with their memory.
Absolutely.
So either phenomena either caused it, the debriefing, and we know debriefings did go on afterwards, and the AFOSI were involved with that, and maybe other agencies, because Jim has said he was debriefed 13, 14 times. Adrian certainly remembers being badly debriefed, and other people who don't talk, maybe that's why, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, Adrian was told bullets were cheap. That's clear to see where other airmen got their stories from, because, you know, that's... Anyway, while all this was going on, while Colonel Holt was in the forest, Sergeant Rick Bobo, he was up in the weapons storage area, in the tower, in the weapons storage area, and he's seeing lights over the forest, and he's calling them in all the while to the CSC, saying that he's seeing lights in the forest, and they're saying to him, yeah, everything's in hand, we've got an investigation going on, you know, not to worry about it. And while he's there, and an unannounced person came up into the weapons tower and is looking through a scope and watching this thing all the while. And Rick says that one of these lights was over the forest and that didn't move for like 30 minutes or so. And he said he could have put crosshairs on it and never moved. Well, we ain't got no aircraft or even balloons or anything what could do that. So there was definitely some other interest in whatever it was, what was in the sky, you know, for this mystery person to go up into the tower. That's really, what's the word? You know, that wouldn't normally happen. Normally someone who's going up the tower or even entering the weapons storage area, they would be announced, you know, and they, not just anyone can go up there. And Ricky tried to make conversation with this mystery man, but he never acknowledged him. You know, you can imagine Rick Bobo was only a young airman as well. He's up there for about 20 minutes with him, never said a word through him, looking through his scope, and when he left, he just never said anything anyway. So I suppose what we should really cover now, because this is a very fragmented case, and I'm not sure that just 3 days of activities happened anyway. So I think we should discuss what Adrian, his side of the story as well.
Yeah, sure. Because he's actually not said too much over the years, has he? Or some of it is, some of the statements have clashed with others.
Yeah, they do. I mean, this is a problem with Adrian. You know, I've probably corresponded with Adrian now for several years, and he'll come in fits and starts. He's hard to pin down. I mean, John's a good friend to him, and, you know, we can never pin him down to commit to anything really. We've done really well to get him on Phenomenon Radio. I mean, that was a breakthrough, and I think he said most of what he could remember there. But Adrian is haunted with bad dreams, nightmares, and flashbacks. And you can understand why the bloke don't want anything to do with it. It's because of this reason. He didn't have a good time of it. And I think he was scared for his family's life as well as his own at the time. But his story, all I can say to the people listening to this is just let me just go through what Adrian has told me, and he's checked this and he's verified it. Because that don't tie into Colonel Holt's story, absolutely. Just bear in mind, this could have happened at another time, or elements of it could have happened at another time, because Adrian is for certain confused, So anyway, this is Adrian's story. D-Flight had just completed a normal guard mount, and the guys had been assigned to their post. Adrian was Alpha 1. He remembers that there wasn't security specialists on duty at the base. It was actually law enforcement, 2 law enforcement. It was Christmas time, so things weren't running as normal. There was a sergeant and tech sergeant. So he met up with them and exchanged what was going on with the base. And that night, Adrian was the officer in charge. I don't know what the exact word is. I think there was a name for it anyway. But he was the person in charge that night. So he said it was around about midnight, and Adrian was still in the alert area at Bentwaters. He just started making his rounds, and he was visiting everyone on their posts, making his way over to Woodbridge, and a call come over on the radio that he had to go down to see the bloke at the East Gate, because he had some problems down there. So he goes down there at the East Gate, and there's a young airman on there terrified. It's the East Gate again. And so he says that he was seeing lights in the forest, and they weren't nothing like he'd seen before, and he was scared, and he thought there might be a fire, but he was frightened. And so Adrian says to him, well, what are you looking at? What do you see? And so he says, there's something out there, and Adrian's going, something like what? He's saying, well, there's lights out there. And so Adrian's saying, well, what kind of lights are out there? And he says, I don't know. He says, there's lots of lights out there, and I don't feel right, and I don't want to be here on my own. And so Adrian had to tell him to calm down. He said, look, that's off the base. That's not, it's not happening on the base. So if you see anything, just call it in, let me know, and we'll take it from there. But you just got to hold your position there. So anyway, sorry, I've lost where I am.
That's all right. Be with us out there.
Yeah, sorry. Right, so now we've got to jump back to where Colonel Holt arrives on the scene at in Rendlesham Forest. So he ordered Sergeant Bustings, as we know, to go out and to pick up some replacement light oils, because the light oils there weren't working. So anyway, Adrian, on his way back driving over to RF Bentwaters, he saw more lights, and Adrian described this to me like he was when you're going to get pulled over by a police car. I suppose you have done, David, we all have time. And that dread, you see the red blue lights and stuff like that. He said it was like that, so he knew it weren't a car, and he sped up and he got out of the way. Adrian got over to the motor pool, and he says there that there was a young female airman called Cookie, and she filled up one of the replacement light oils and showed them that they were gassed up and working correctly. And Adrian arrived back at the checkpoint in the forest. When they did arrive back there, they only managed to get one of the replacement light oils working, and then only for a brief time, and then it spluttered, and that died out. So anyway, Colonel Holt had sent him for more replacements because he'd got bored of waiting, and he wanted to get on with his investigation. So that's where we hear Adrian radioing the Central Security Control to ask for more light oils. So when Sergeant Bustinza came back, he said that when he got to the logging track, there was 2 British police cars parked by the roadside, and you can see where someone else's story is coming from, because this was all Adrian's story. And he said 2 bobbies were British police officers, and they were guarding the entrance. So while he's trying to catch up with Colonel Holt's group, so you can imagine Colonel Holt is now doing his investigation, and I've listened to the tape, and Bustinza can't be heard in any of them conversations early on, so he was somewhere else, weren't he? So that this does sort of all add up. While he's trying to catch up with Colonel Holt's group, he too saw lights moving through the forest. In an area of the forest, was bathed with a yellow mist. It's that yellow mist thing again, almost knee-high, like a fog. As he moved closer to the mist, about 20 feet above the ground, Adrian says there hovered an object moving up and down. When he eventually caught up with Colonel Holt's party, he found them surrounding the huge UFO with a small clearing near to the farmer's field. And Bustinza said he couldn't understand how such a large craft could have landed in such a small area. So as soon as Bustinza arrived at the clearing, Colonel Holt ordered him to join the men who were surrounding the craft. He was in awe and mesmerised at what he was seeing, this huge circular craft. He stood there watching it, and he says people had camera equipment, not your everyday normal equipment, sophisticated, not like the normal, like you would have at that time, sophisticated kit. So almost like they were there to, they knew it was going to be there maybe. And there was lots of this kit, and some people were filming everything, and others, including civilians, were taking photographs. So Bustinza says Colonel Holt ordered Bustinza and one other airman to confiscate the cameras, and this was the cameras from 2 British nationals, but you can imagine a bit of a row ensued. There's American airmen asking British citizens on British land in the Queen's Forest to hand over their cameras, but they did. And Colonel Holt said that they would be dealt with at a higher level. But everything was weird. The animals were acting strange. Everything was acting weird. They didn't seem to have any sense of direction. So Adrian said he felt sure that was an extraterrestrial visitation. He didn't see any beings, but what he did see was the outlines of something, and he wondered, was that his shadow, the shadow or something, but he definitely never saw any beings. He said the UFO was much larger than the object that had been witnessed by Jim Penniston and John Burroughs earlier in the week. He said the object was about 30 foot across and had strange markings on its body. But it was difficult to define because it was constantly changing and distorting its shape. And where have we heard that before?
Although the strange markings sound familiar from Jim's story, don't they?
Well, that does, yeah. But the distorting is something what come from
that's right.
the other. He said at times that appeared like a soluble aspirin. That's almost as if the script has been written for someone else. Yeah. But anyway, other times that was thicker in the middle like a mushroom. So anyway, after a while, Bustinza, he can't remember how long, but he thinks about 15 to 30 minutes. He says he was hit by a cool blast of air as the craft silently lifted off, and it separated in a few different lights, and it went off in different directions. Now, I've wondered, is this the incident that Colonel Holt talks about, where something exploded into 5 different lights? Because that isn't mentioned on the Holt tape anywhere. And you would have thought that would have been. That's, even if you was just talking about the main events, you would have mentioned that. That's not on there. Okay. Or maybe if the tape has been edited, like a lot of people suggest, maybe that was a part that whoever didn't want getting out.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, I think there must have been more tape than you actually hear, because if it was out, they were out there for hours, so I don't think it would have been, sort of on and off that much. So just cut it down to, what was it, about 15 minutes, isn't it, or 11 minutes?
18 minutes, I think.
Yeah, 18 minutes.
Well, 2 things. He told Georgina Bruni that was edited. That's one thing. Georgina's not around to verify it. But Andrew Pike, who wrote the Rendlesham file, his family are recording people. They've got their own studios. And he done an in-depth investigation into that. And when you stop and start a cassette tape, that leaves a different signature to when you edit it. And he knew exactly where bits had been put in and taken out. So, who knows? Only Colonel Holt knows. Maybe he's going to bring the rest of the tape to your conference. That'd be good.
You never know. I mean,
well, you never know.
There's certainly questions to, ask about it.
There's lots. I mean, Colonel Holt, no doubt, is a good officer, and maybe he is just being a good officer, I don't know. I think he knows more than what he's saying, for definite, and there's probably very good reason. And there probably is a very good reason why he's handled it the way he has. Yeah. Or either that or he just don't know.
Well, that's right. That could be it. I know, I've never heard anyone say anything bad about him. There are people that worked, I think he was quite respected about. So, and I know he says himself, he's told me he doesn't remember everything. He said because it was almost 40 years ago now, so he struggles a bit actually with the actual locations. I mean, when we went out into the woods last year, but during Christmas time, we were sort of thinking, I think this is the place. It wasn't quite you know, but it was actually quite sure it was the place, but it wasn't 100% sure, you know, the exact landing place I'm talking about. You know, the rough location, but the exact landing place was the problem.
And that's very understandable, and you've got to remember that forest is pitch black.
Yeah, and it's changed quite a lot as well. I mean, you know, I mean, when you walk around in the forest, it's very easy to get lost, isn't it, in the dark, even in the daytime.
Dead easy, man. Yeah, that is dead easy. So, you know, I mean, I'm not sure that the landing sites, what we've been told, are correct. I don't think anyone can be certain. Obviously, Colonel Holt's got a good idea, roughly, because he knows how far away he was from the house in the farmer's field.
But there is one thing.
There is another field to the right of that.
The place where they put the monument isn't the right place, is it at all, as I understand?
No, we know that, yeah.
I think they've just found like a convenient place on a little hill to put that monument more than anything.
Well, it's been put there for convenience, and that's near the track and stuff like that. And there might be a very good reason why. I mean, everything's changed. The trees were taken out. Any radioactive soil, what had been there would have been long gone by now. You know, that's why I chuckled when I heard people were doing surveys for radiation there now. I mean, 30 odd years ago, all the trees are gone, all the soil is gone. Yeah. You know, I don't know what they thought they could. And even Capel Green, I mean, thousands of tons of soil were put in on Capel Green. It was nothing to do with radiation. That was to do because they wanted to grow a particular crop, and they needed a good layer of topsoil, because that's good old-fashioned sand when you go down.
So now, Capel Green. Now, let me sort this out, Ronnie. Capel Green is actually not the farmer's field, is it? Really? Right. It's opposite.
Well. What? I've looked into this in depth, David, and the Capel Green was a settlement which is over on the other side of the road, past the farmers, or the cottages. They call them the farmer's house. They ain't the farmer's house at all. They're the cottages. Over that road, and the settlement of Capel Green was over on that side. This was going back to Saxon times, I suppose, or maybe even before then. Right, so any maps prior to 1980, I thought, I always had Capel Green marked as there. Right, then when the incident come along, modern maps will have Capel Green, some of them showing where it should be, and some of them showing where the farmer's field is. But I have recently found a map that precedes all of them, and Capel Green was the whole of that area.
Oh, right, okay.
So we're right and wrong.
That's interesting. Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, but, we're right and wrong.
But actually, the discoloration in that field, apparently it was there in the early 50s, wasn't it? Apparently, from an aerial photograph I heard. The one that's,
there was a, the round circle where, the one that Peter photographed and said the grass was greener there. That exact spot, which actually is different to where Larry Warren says it is now. I mean, there's one picture in the book. Look at that, you know, that Peter took. And, I'm not knocking Peter at all. He was mugged like all of us. But, the picture there where the grass was greener, was there in an aerial photograph taken in 1957 by the RAF.
But it's just we also make that clear that that's the place where, in Left at Eastgate, the book, which was withdrawn, is actually stated that is where the UFO landed.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and they're using that, discoloration in the ground to prove, as proof that the UFO landed and aliens walked about.
Yeah. But no, that's been there since the 1950s. That whole area is quite a historic area. To the right of the Finger of Trees, they done an archaeological dig, maybe 10 years ago, and there's, the farmer had put in permission for an irrigation pond to be put there, and as part of the conditions that he could do it, he had to agree for Suffolk Archaeological Society, or whatever they call themselves, to come in there and do a dig. They left all the finds in situ, but that's just one mass of Iron Age finds on that side. So there was a settlement there. There was enclosures, you know, like which would have been stone, I suppose. Nothing has been excavated on the left of the Finger of the Trees, but over on the site which is called Capel Green in the olden day maps, which was the Capel Green settlement, I suppose, that's all Iron Age and Saxon there as well. And the Burrow Hill, which is overlooking the estuary, which is where John Burroughs ended up, when they excavated that, they found 200 male children and adult bodies there. So they think that was the graveyard for the last Saxon fight, skirmish, whatever you call it. That was the last one. So they're steeped in history all over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't think you can pay too much, take too much credence from the Springwater Laboratories report that Peter had done, because really, if you look into it, that don't tell you anything that a bonfire couldn't have said. You know, that the soil was impervious to water, and so is ash, you know, so, yeah, I think well, I don't think Peter did for a minute, but I think people involved wanted to make that fit.
That's right. That's what was given. Yeah. So you're given something to look at, and you're told the story, and you go and you think, okay, well, that must be the actual story. You know, that's
well, the whole book is written like that, David, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
definitely.
You read it.
I've read it. I read it twice before I found out that I was being led up garden path, and you set me on the right path.
Yeah, well...
And then I started reading it again, and I think, you know what, you're damn right. And then I started doing a lot of checks myself on Google and everything. I think, well, none of this makes sense at all, you know. It's...
No, good storyteller.
Yeah, yeah, mate, it was a fantastic novel, yeah.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I'm throwing my book out now. It's a piece of history. I'll keep it. Yeah. You know, apart from that, I like Pete very much. You know?
Yeah. I think he was he feels as much let down as anybody. You know, he said as much on the show, didn't he? That I did with him, and several other shows that he's done. You know?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, but
excuse me. I've got a bit of a sore throat and a cough. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if everyone knows out there, but Left at Eastgate was actually withdrawn by the publishers, and as 4 proven lies. So, and Peter supported that withdrawal, and he also withdrew the Holt Woodbridge book that he released on the back of it, and also what was the other one? The one of Nick Pope one. Deception. What was that called?
Yeah, Deliberate
Deception. That's the one. The one that was the free book. He withdrew on the back of because they were all basically to back up Left at Eastgate, weren't they? The books.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, Peter was Larry's biggest ally for years and years and years. When you know, I don't know when. I do. Well, he has said on the radio that the thing that made him stand up and listen is when I exposed his lie about the News of the World, Larry Warren's lie about the News of the World, and he was trying to tell Peter that I was a bad person. I was just searching for the truth, David.
Well, like any of us.
I don't want to fall out with anyone. Unfortunately, ufology is a bit like that. Yeah. You know, if you stand up for yourself and you're going to make, well, I don't want to make enemies, but I suppose I have along the way. You know, people who support him. So. Yeah,
I mean, let's face it. I mean, Ronnie, we all look at things kind of differently in some ways. But I think there's sort of like gentlemanly discussions and disagreements where you can say, okay, well, you see it that way, I see it this way. We don't really know what the actual truth is at the end of the day. Yeah. And we have to sort of just say, oh, we have to agree to disagree. You know, it's kind of the way it goes. But then you get other people that like to then start throwing mud and insults and threats at you, and none of us
on the person, don't
and none of us take kindly to that. So
no, why should you put up with that? You don't need to, do you?
Well, it's unnecessary.
We're not professionals in this, are we?
You're just trying to get the truth in there.
Yeah, and I'd like to, for people I know who are involved, I'd like to see that they found out what really happened, because they don't know.
I mean, I respect each and every one of them, because they went through something that none of us would want to go through, not to the extent that they have over the years. Something happened, and it affected all of them mentally in one way or another, and you know.
Yeah, and some people
and physically,
some people have been affected terribly by it, and they've become friends of mine over the years, and that hurt me to think that they're still suffering bad, and no one's listening to them, you know. You know, I know there's certain people getting help at this moment. A lot of that has been down to John Burroughs, because he's helped them behind the scenes, but there are people who aren't getting any help, who don't want, you know, they just want it all to go away. That's affected them mentally, you know, bad. You know, who really knows why Kabansak won't talk? You know, that might be he's got demons as well. They all got affected bad, whether that was something what we done to him. I mean, you know, the human race or the agencies within the USAF and outside of it, something they done to him that's affected them really bad, or that is a phenomena that none of us know about or understand. But whatever it was, someone out there do know, and I think there was people well, I'm convinced there's people who do know what happened to them airmen over them few nights.
Yeah, I'm sure more is known than has been put out there. Yeah, I'm definitely.
Well, for definite, there seemed too many coincidences. A lot of things were put into place, weren't they? You know, like and when they knew something was going off at that weekend. That's why that little bit of Adrian's account, when he says there were people there filming that, and there were people there with cameras, and there was people there. I think at one stage he said there was people there with military suits that he didn't recognise. And this could have all been plugged into his head. We don't know. You know, it could have been something that was done to him afterwards. Either way, I mean, that's a terrible way to treat the airmen, you know, are only there to protect and serve the country. No, but something went off, something happened to them airmen, whether that was a UFO, and I'm still not really convinced that there is such a thing. I've seen things, you know, but I can't explain. But I don't think that was little aliens floating about in bubbles.
No, well, I mean, there's only one person that's seen that anyway, you know, and... Yeah, but, I mean, we were all taken in on it, weren't we? Yeah, definitely, yeah.
For definite, that was the cover story what was put out there. J.D. Ingalls was told Brenda, you know, stop investigating this, that's a load of rubbish, that's what I was told to tell you. That was definitely the cover story. Why would two USAF officers go to Eastern Radar to confiscate or look at the radar tapes and tell them a story about aliens? Unless they wanted it
to get out, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So, whatever it was that they were dealing with, they wanted to put that cover story out to take the attention away from what really did happen.
Yeah.
And so far, no one's come up with any real proof what did happen. I think maybe that might do. Maybe one day there'll be something else released. But I don't think it's in the public domain. I think it's well and securely hidden away, you know, in the vaults of, you know, wherever they keep these things, but that's well and truly hidden. The AFOSI say that they done a report on it, and we've heard from Rick Doty of things out of there that I know happened and I don't think are in the public domain. It's what made me think there's some truth in what he was saying. But then you've got to remember he's a counterintelligence agent. Even though he's retired, you know, who knows?
Yeah. Well,
maybe that report will come to light one day.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I'm waiting for Jim Penniston's book to come out, and, you know, I think it will be pretty interesting. I'll gather it's going to be something like about 800 pages. I've got him coming up on the next show.
Yeah. Well, I'll be interested to listen to Jim. I'll be absolutely honest with you, David. All this binary stuff, that's all a bit too deep for me. Yeah. I don't understand it. From what I
understand, it's all a bit too deep for Jim Penniston as well. And it's actually it's actually Gary Osborne that's going to answer all the mathematics of all that. You know.
I just wonder if that's going to be just a little bit too much for the average, I suppose we call ourselves enthusiasts, David, to understand.
That's all we are. That's all I am, Ronnie. I mean, enthusiast. I'm certainly no expert or you know.
No, I don't think there can't be any experts in this field because we don't know what happened.
No, that's right.
So you know, there's no experts.
No. But you're right.
No.
But anyway, I think we're going to have to leave it there. We've done a good old over 2 hours here, Ronnie. I think
we've given it a good go, David, haven't we? Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there is. I know there's other things that we could have included.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we could have gone for a week with all this, but
I tried to stick to the main events because that just gets so complicated, and that's just going to put people off. But all I would say, David, is anyone who wants to investigate this further, there's lots of books out there. There's You Can't Tell the People by Georgina Bruni.
One of the best.
I wouldn't. Yep. In my opinion, one of the best. I think the best one is Andrew Pike's Rendlesham File because it goes into much more detail.
Well, you can't get that now, can you? That disappeared and it's very difficult to get now.
I'm sure if anyone really wanted to see it, Andrew would give me permission to give him a PDF. He's never refused before, put it that way.
Yes, please.
Yeah, right. That would have to be with his permission.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But when I've asked him before, or people have asked him, and I said, "Well, ask Andrew, and if he wants you to have it, then I don't think there's any other reason that he's with Brewer. I don't think that's anything to do with MOD or anything like that. I just think he got thoroughly fed up with the whole business, and I can understand.
Yeah, sure.
Him. Yeah.
I think he knew a lot about all the, call them arguments, if you like, that was going on about it, and maybe he didn't want to get involved or something, I don't know. Yeah.
But that's a very interesting book anyway, and then you've got Holt in Woodbridge. No, sorry, Holt.
Oh yeah, not that one.
Perspective. No, Holt Perspective. No, I would say they should read everything.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, if you can get a copy of Holt at Woodbridge, that actually backs up what's left at Eastgate quite a lot.
That's
but
right,
which
yeah.
is all been sort of, but a lot of that is proven lies anyway. But the interesting thing, I think, is Peter's half of the book is actually pretty. It does cover a lot of the actual facts of the case, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's if you just skip through the bullshit, and that's written in a different typeface than what Peter's is, so it's easy to pick out.
Yeah.
But you should read it anyway, because then people will know for themselves, make their own mind up.
I think I've read it about 5 times now, and mine's all, my second copy's got all lines and marks and all sorts of, the pages are falling out and everything.
Yeah, I think mine is, but that's the sort of book you can pick up and think, oh my God, did I really believe that? Right. Or did he really say that? Because he's not saying that now,
no.
But people should read it. We've got Encounter in Rendlesham. And then
that's the Nick Pope one, isn't it, with John and Jim? I quite like that. I thought that was I thought that was quite well written. And it seemed to cover a lot of the truth. Whether it actually left things out, I don't know. But
yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, I don't know how John and Jim feel about it. I think that that they perhaps in hindsight written it differently. I think Jim has said that there was stuff left out.
Well, that's probably what's led to him writing his own book now.
Writing this book, so everything for a reason. Yeah. There's another book was written by a person who, should we say, flew the UFO desk before Nick Pope. His name is Ralph Noyes. Now, this is claimed to be a fiction book, and it's called A Secret Property. And read that, because there's lots of hidden clues and bits and pieces in there that might just get you thinking down another avenue.
A Secret Property.
I'm sure he wrote it for a reason.
I'm just making a note of that.
I think he calls the deputy base commander there Colonel Hui or something. So that in the hard.
Funny enough, there were earlier on, before Holt, there was a Holt, wasn't there? There was H-A-U-T.
Yeah, there was,
which is pretty strange. I know another strange thing is, where Colonel Holt lives now in
Woodbridge.
Woodbridge. That's weird as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and also I think there's other people have got ended up in Woodbridge. In different Woodbridges, more than one Woodbridge in America.
It's really strange.
I know. That seems really weird, but there's a lot of weird coincidences.
Yeah.
In this case, and I don't think that'll ever end.
No.
I think we'll be talking about it in 10 years' time. I hope that eventually one day, the guys that have suffered this get to at least know.
Yeah.
Even if I've got to be told in private, leave it alone, this is what happened to you. That's a shame that they've been treated that way. But, the forces, and not just American, British forces as well, we've got a history of experimenting and doing bad things to our people.
Yeah.
We have.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And maybe that's what it was, or maybe that's part of it, or maybe something was done to them to make them all forget. Well, they've done a damn good job anyway, and you can understand why they allowed Larry Warren to carry on all these years, because he was doing their job for
great
them.
Disinformation, exactly. And also, let's put this one to bed, Ronnie, before we pack up. The SAS invasion of, I think that was a David Clark thing that was put out, wasn't it? Remember that was another, false egg, if you like. That was meant as an April Fool joke, but that didn't get put out, and then it was picked up years later. Yeah, that's right. That was meant as an April Fool joke. The SAS did, do, like war games with the Americans. Nothing like that happened. No, that's a lot of rubbish. Not on a base like that, no. There'd have been deaths. Oh God, yeah. Anyway, well, I think we're going to have to wind it up there. I'll tell you what, I'll just, thank you for coming on. I'm just going to close this by saying, in Left at Eastgate, the new edition, the paper edition, Peter Robbins closes his opening section from which he wrote in 1996. Our hope is that readers will give us a fair hearing, then begin to pursue answers to that question for themselves. And I think that's exactly what we've all been trying to do. Yeah, absolutely, we have, and
and we've done it, haven't we? And I think the brief that Larry Warren gave Peter was that if he could find out that he was a fraud or telling lies, then, you know, that was up to him to do whatever he wanted to do. And he's done that as well. So he certainly kept his word. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, Ray, well, I think we have to leave it there. And thanks ever so much for coming on with your brains, and always got to pick 'em.
Well, it's been a pleasure, David. I've enjoyed talking, and I hope that the listeners have at least learnt something a little bit new. And that'll certainly give people something to talk about, won't it? And coming up to your conference, which is in September.
September the 8th, yeah. I hope you're going to try and come?
I'm because I do my winter employment then, I won't know until I start whether I can or I can't. But if I'm not working, I should definitely be there.
Okay, that's good.
If only I have a beer with a few friends.
Right. Well, anyway, Ron, you've got to wind it up, and thank you very much. And thank you for coming on, and thank you out there for listening. You've been listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. This is Paranormal Dimensions. I'm David Young, and we're going to say goodbye to Ronnie Dugdale now, and thank you again for coming on. Thanks, Ronnie, and see you soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers. Good night, all.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK Radio Network.